On today's show, Ime Udoka reflecting on the Houston Rockets season up to this point, what he's learned about coaching this team in year one. And then, have you been impressed with Alperen Sengun's year 3 leap? Well, it almost didn't happen. We're going to talk about that and so much more on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin. The show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day. Thank you for being an everydayer, whether you're on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making the show part of your day every single day. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, the X's and O's man himself, Alykhan Bijani, who you can track down on Twitter at Rockets_Insider here, because we've got a couple really incredible articles to kind of unpack and discuss. One written by good friend of the program, The Athletic's Kelly Iko, and then another written by Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports. The Jake Fisher article really concerning Alperen Sengun and what could have been with the Rockets this season with their pursuit of Brook Lopez. So we'll tackle that, at some point in this episode, because there are some tie-ins there, as well as with what Kelly shared in his article, which was a sit-down Q&A exclusive with Houston Rockets head coach Ime Udoka, with Udoka kind of reflecting on this Rockets season up to this point, what he's learned about himself as a coach, what he's learned about this group of guys, specifically, Alperen Sengun, Jalen Green, Fred VanVleet, some of the goals for this team moving forward, some of the things that they're trying to achieve over these last 20 or so games of the regular season. And there was a lot of good stuff in both articles, Alykhan, but we're going to kind of start, because there were some really juicy tidbits in the Kelly article. And for me, one of the things that immediately stood out was just how much Ime Udoka has raved about Alperen Sengun. And I want to highlight that because, the other day I was asked on social, how I would gauge how the Rockets would kind of evaluate the young core. And one of the things that I shared is that that they're probably a little bit lower on Sengun than you would think, given his success this season. And it was a very quick reply. I didn't get a chance to really contextualize that. I want to emphasize here that Ime Udoka absolutely loves Sengun. He is, loved him from the moment he got to Houston. He was really excited about him in the summer. His playmaking chops, his offensive versatility. These were all things that Ime Udoka was incredibly excited about. And he said as much in the article, kind of highlighting Sengun's strengths, the ability to play offense through him, and kind of the adjustment for the team as a whole, and for even Sengun to have so much responsibility offensively this season, adjusting to how teams are scheming against him, managing double and triple teams, generating good looks for his teammates, all of that. And even comparing him at one point to Joel Embiid, saying that he's, a better passer than Embiid, but that he's coached a lot of really talented big men and been around a lot of really talented big men, and that's kind of the closest comparison that he has.
I thought it was fascinating the way that Ime was talking about him, similar to what he's talked about him throughout the course of the season, that he's talented, he has these things, but he wants to push him. He wants him to continue to grow and be mature. And Ime talks a little bit about that also in the Jake Fisher article later. But in regards to the Kelly article, I think one thing that Ime is always honest. And there's a quote where he says in the Kelly article, it's really about how he adjusts and us putting him in better positions, but also growing and adapting to the success he's had this year so far. I think it's like a 3-pronged approach there. He has to be able to watch the film himself and understand where is a secondary defender coming from. Are they coming from the baseline ordinarily? If he's at the top of the free throw line and he can see the whole floor, they're still sending a double. Where is that coming from? Usually he needs to start learning and reacting to, eventually it'll slow down for him, but he has to start figuring those things out. then Ime points out that we have to put him in a better position. Where I would venture to say, Jackson, post All-Star break, they're doing just that. You're seeing things in areas of the floor where he likes, and you're actually seeing things closer to the basket. A lot more elbow pick and rolls that are away from the perimeter, which makes it tougher for a secondary defender to come over before the play, or I'm sorry, after the play. They would have to already be showing themselves, which makes it easier on him to be able to make a read. And then lastly, growing and adapting to the success he's had this year so far. It's also a mindset. When you're a young player, you see success, you can kind of get used to it. And he doesn't want Alpi to get used to it. He wants Alpi to continue to fight and know that he can get better. And the more criticism, but also with praise, I think is Ime's way of fueling Alpi and telling you, hey, buddy, you're doing a good job, but there's still a long ways to go if you keep working at it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the benefits of kind of the way that the Rockets have really post All-Star break leaned into, Sengun even more so offensively, putting him in better spots, making him more comfortable, is that we've actually seen this Rockets team go from being one of the lowest volume 3-point shooting teams in the entire association to post All-Star break. They're currently third in 3-point attempts in the entire association. They're shooting 40.5 3-pointers per game post All-Star break. And we knew, like, pre All-Star break, right, this was a thing where the team, it had this really kind of rugged, almost like grit and grind Grizzlies identity, where they would win some really ugly, Ime Udoka talked about it, raggedy kind of games, because they just weren't generating a high volume of threes, right? It wasn't uncommon for the Rockets to walk away with, 25 or 30, ish 3-point attempts. And we were even begging earlier in the season saying this team needs to shoot more. They're getting outmathed by opponents quite often. A big part of that was the lack of 3-point shooting overall on the roster. So the emergence of Cam Whitmore has been a big part of having additional shooting on the roster, eliminating, Jae'Sean Tate from the rotation, another non-shooter who really wasn't as effective at, spacing the floor and getting up a high volume of 3-point shots. So that's been a big kind of effective thing. And it kind of, leads into a point that we want to bring up a little bit later on. That Ime even talks about, at one point in the article with Kelly, is really pushing the pace, right? Really, generating some better offensive opportunities through getting out in transition, scoring easily in transition. And one of the reasons that they didn't do that earlier this season is because Ime came in with a strict goal in mind, and it kind of like a multi-step approach of how to rehabilitate this roster. And his first approach was, hey, we were a garbage defensive team. How do we not be a garbage defensive team? They were dead last or second last in the NBA in transition points scored, or transition, points given up last season. So how do you eliminate that? You take better care of the basketball. How do you take better care of the basketball? You slow things down, right? You don't have these, fast breaks with reckless abandon where you go out and you got turnovers on turnovers on turnovers, live ball turnovers especially, which are absolutely killers when you turn the ball over and another team is able to get out in transition and then score against you. So because of that, the team slowed things down to a crawl early this season. Basically, they put on like the bumper rails, the training wheels, whatever you want to call it, and they did things as safe as possible in order to implement that high level of defense and be able to play more so in the half court. Now that the team has those principles understood, now post All-Star break, we're actually seeing them pick up the pace a little bit more, numbers that we want to revisit a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned about this concept of habits, Ime talks about in the Kelly article, and I'm going to read the quote that was very fascinating. I've coached veteran teams in my career, and you understand that even with those guys, it's mistakes, habits, and tendencies. You have to try to break continually. It will take a little bit longer with young guys, whether it's half a season, full season, or whatever the case may be. Guys learn, grow, and change at a different pace. That's the end of that part. But earlier in that same kind of response, he said, when you're relying on this amount of young guys, you're constantly trying to instill habits that will carry them for the rest of their careers. That was very fascinating. Like we saw that early success because they were starting to buy in. But, habits are habits. They come out sometimes. And in the course of a game, I'll give an example. I think a very prominent example is Cam Whitmore. Still a rookie. But, Ime talks about it with Cam as well. He is somebody who knows he can get a shot. He's been the best player on his teams, probably in high school and college. The NBA is different. He has to learn to be able to find the best shot, not only for himself, but for his teammates. And so that's an adjustment. And you're seeing Cam get better over the course of the season, but it takes time, right? And ultimately, a lot of these bad habits, it takes time. I'm seeing the progress from Jalen. I'm seeing the progress from Jabari, all these young players, but it's going to take time, and who knows how long it's going to take. I thought it would take post All-Star break before the season when I said, hey, the Rockets will kind of maybe take take a next step post All-Star break with Ime Udoka. They're starting to in a lot of different ways because Ime is adding some things, but it's very fascinating to see how a younger team may take a little bit longer, Jackson, actually, right? And growing out of these bad habits.
More on those bad habits in just a moment, as well as the Fisher article, the Alperen Sengun emergence that almost wasn't because the Rockets were so close to signing Brook Lopez this past offseason. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each and every week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. First name on the list, Kelly Olynyk, set for an extended duration as the Raptors starting center, and we know how good he can be. A Rockets legend in Kelly Olynyk, absolutely a name that you're going to want to pick up there. Raptors locking him down long term, and he is growing into a bigger role with Toronto, so definitely a name you want to be on the lookout for. And another ex-Rockets legend that we got to talk about, Kyle Lowry. With DeAnthony Melton still sidelined, Nick Nurse has been leaning on one of his old veterans, and Lowry has been surprisingly useful. Still a little bit left in the tank for old Kyle Lowry, so definitely a couple names you want to be on the lookout for. Now, Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows that a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, the same as with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit available to U.S. customers only. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Continuing to unpack this Ime Udoka Q&A with the Athletic's Kelly Iko. Link to the article in the episode description. Definitely go check it out. It's a fantastic article. Now, at one point, Alykhan, Ime was asked by Kelly about kind of just the timeline, kind of handling development while also trying to, maintain competitiveness with this roster. And he was specifically asked about the rookies, Thompson and Cam Whitmore. And in that answer, Ime kind of highlighted what stands out about them. And he basically said their competitiveness, the athleticism, their versatility, all those things stand out immediately. With all those guys, it's learning. They have different skill sets and different things that they do well and poorly, minimizing mistakes and then trying to maximize their game overall. We love what they are, and I'm probably coaching them as hard or harder than anybody because I want them to avoid some of the pitfalls and things that our younger guys went through a few years ago, trying to instill those habits and not build the bad ones. And unfortunately, this is it is what it is. It's a direct shot at the previous regime. For what it was, for what it is, the Rockets did not have a lot of structure under Stephen Silas. There was a lot of just do whatever you want, and I think that's kind of dovetails into what we've seen specifically with Jalen Green this year, right? Is Ime Udoka has had to break a lot of bad habits for Jalen Green, and he's had to try and make him a more well-rounded, a winning player. And he's still in the process of doing so. And I think that we can both agree that while this year has been a bit disappointing from the straight up, scoring aspect for Jalen Green, he's absolutely improved everywhere else in his game. We've been consistent here on LOR and on social media talking about that element, that he absolutely has improved as a defender. He's improved as a playmaker. He's making better reads on the floor. He's doing all these little things better. It's just that, because he's had to put so much attention to detail in the rest of his game, that I do think it's been a huge adjustment for him understanding, how to be effective offensively, when in the past he could, walk into, and I believe Ime even says this at one point in the article, that anybody can walk into 20 points if you just get the ball all the time. Something I'm paraphrasing here, but something along those lines. Basically, Ime saying that, anybody in the NBA can score 20 points, 25 a night if they get unlimited touches and you can shoot yourself out of a rut or whatever. And that's what Jalen had the first 2 years. He doesn't have that now, right? He has to learn how to score efficiently and within the flow of the offense. He has to be able to play both off ball and on ball. He has to learn how to cut. He has to learn how to move. He has to learn how to run sets. All these different things. And this is a big learning curve for Jalen. And it's probably, we talked about this earlier this season, but for Jalen, he probably had the biggest adjustment of any of the core six to make this year. And it seems that, Ime is still very bought in on what he can be and his future success with this team.
A part of it is that he wants Jalen to make the right reads, right, in the half court. And there's a quote before where he was talking about the offense and is like, did he bring in any offensive principles from Boston? Because Boston was very much guard actions, right? We're seeing those guard actions with the Rockets, but not to the same level or extent we've seen it with Boston, even today with Boston's offense. But he said something that I thought was interesting. I've minimized what I have done offensively while our guys are catching up. You don't want to install too much or have guys overwhelmed. More so thinking, reacting, and playing, and growing in the sets we put in until we can move on and do more. That last sentence really stands out to me. He says, more so thinking, reacting, and playing, and growing in the sets we put in until we can move on and do more. He wants them to understand when you have a set, how to react accordingly, how to be able to make reads. Post game, Ime has talked about, right? Jalen's learning when that low man is there. What is that low man doing? It's not just about, and I've talked about this on LOR multiple times this season, Jackson. It's not about Jalen initially getting past that first defender. It's about, okay, I know I can get past the first defender. Let me not focus on that. Let me focus on what is that big doing down low, and what is that third defender doing? Are they rotating over? Let me make a read based off of the tertiary line of defense. And Jalen has done that. You're seeing that a little bit more. There's been some passes the last 3 or 4 games, especially post All-Star break, to Alperen Sengun, to others in transition when he's attacking downhill, where I'm like, Jalen's still not at the level yet where he's going to hit a cross-court pass consistently or take it, but he is making better reads once he gets towards the basket. And that's all you can ask, is that growth where it's low in turnover, it's getting other players in position to score. And then now that's opening him up to other things. Those 10 shots that I think he was 1 of 10 from 3 a few games ago, but he was 10 of 13 from inside the 3-point line. Why? Because when he started to attack, he used some of those positions in terms of passing to open things up. So part of that is they're running these kind of introductory sets to get things going. And once all of their processing improves and gets better, then Ime can add in some Spurs sets. Some sets when he was with Philly, some sets when he was with Boston. There's so many sets out there. There's so many variations of things you can do. And you're seeing that post All-Star break. But it takes time. You have to break those bad habits, build good habits. Then you can run sets that allows you to showcase those good habits.
And I think one of the reasons that we're seeing, post All-Star break here, Jalen, have a little bit more success and by extension, guys like Cam Whitmore and Amin Thompson having some more success is, we talked about the pace earlier. Mm-hmm. And Ime closed the Kelly article being asked, what's your philosophy as it pertains to pace? And what has that battle been like? You've got a guard who wants to slow things down and another who wants to push tempo, very specifically without naming names, right? That's Fred VanVleet, who likes to slow things down, play within the half court. Jalen Green, who's been very vocal in some post-game media scrums talking about wanting to play faster, right? Wanting to play to his strengths. And, finding that balance has been tough for Ime. But he went on to say, we do want to increase pace, especially with all these young guys now. Amin's going to play at a different pace than Fred. But once we solidify certain areas, get those down and get our turnovers and shot selection under control, we want to build the pace. That was a big emphasis coming out of the break in the last few games. You've seen that. And we absolutely have. When we look at the numbers for the Rockets post All-Star break versus pre All-Star break, as far as their pace numbers are concerned, post All-Star break, they are 4th in the NBA in pace per NBA.com. They're 4th in the NBA in pace at 102.69. That's solid.
And a few games ago, they were kind of hovering around 1st and 2nd. So it's gone down a little bit, Jackson, but it's still it's much better than it was before All-Star break, which I think you have is probably 17th, correct?
Yeah, 17th before All-Star break. And I want to highlight here too that as far as the numbers go, so because we highlighted earlier, right, the increased 3-point volume, right? Yeah. They're getting more shots up. They're being a little bit more effective offensively. Now the converting on the 3-point shots is another discussion for another day. They're still not shooting great, unfortunately, from three. I think it's hovering around 33% post All-Star break, but I did look at some of the lineup data as well for the Rockets post All-Star break, and their starting lineup has increased the pace dramatically post All-Star break. In 144 minutes post All-Star break, the starters are playing with a 103.87 pace, which if we extrapolated that to the entirety of the NBA season, that would be good enough for number one in the NBA as far as playing with pace. And all four of the Rockets' 5 most used lineups are all well above the NBA's fastest team this season. I can go down the list: 107.46, 104.41, 107.95. The only lineup that isn't up there is basically the starters with the starters with Ime Thompson instead of Dillon Brooks, which is weird. I'm not sure why that lineup is slower than all the other ones, but again, small sample size. Some of these lineups only have 20 minutes, 15 minutes here and there, so you take that as you will. The starters at least have a sample size of 144 minutes post All-Star break. But I think what this tells us, right, is that Ime has absolutely pushed these guys to understand, hey, we can get these opportunities in transition. We can increase tempo, increase the pace a little bit. And we're seeing that, right? That matches the eye test. And I really think that's again, it's helping some of the younger guys like Jalen, like Cam, like Amin, who can, and it's even helping Alperen Sengun to a lesser degree, right? Because I think there's a misconception about Alp that because he's a big man and because he's got this kind of like old school back to the basket post up style game that he can't play in a fast paced offense, which is so far from the truth. Like we see Alp get rebounds and run pretty frequently, right? Like when Alp has people that are running with him, he makes things happen in transition. And so he's very capable of being a big that can actually get out and play with pace and play in transition, especially with his playmaking chops.
I do think it's also really interesting, Jackson, in regards to the way the Rockets are currently playing right now. You're starting to see, tandems or lineups form that are also effective together, like an Ime Thompson with Jalen Green, right? Ime Thompson with Cam. And I really like this lineup from an on-court and off-court perspective because the numbers back it up too. A Jalen Green Cam Whitmore lineup. And we're starting to get this data. I'd like still for them to keep trying to win these games because there's no kind of match to playing playoff basketball. They're likely not going to make the playoffs, but the more they keep pushing to try to make a 10 spot, the more games they'll be in against teams that will be scouting them and trying to take away their best option. And the more film that the coaches will have, and the more experience the players will have in understanding these are the weaknesses in my game right now. These are hard teams and defenses are trying to exploit it. And this is what I can do to be successful. So a lot of things to come with this and a lot of really good things, hopefully, for Ime Udoka and the coaching staff to be able to work with going into the offseason.
I'm going to call you Bad Vibes Bijani from now on for saying that they're not going to make the playoffs. How dare you? Okay, we are maintaining the utmost optimism here. No, I don't know. Look, wait, we don't know what's going to happen at this point. If they catch,
I hope they do, man. I would love to see the Rockets back in the playoffs. I mean, granted, you saw how fun games are when, like that Clippers game, the crowd was into it, right? But I love to see the Rockets crowd back at a playoff game. That's always fun. So I'm rooting for it. Let's see what happens.
Give me a 10-seeded Rockets team. Unfortunately, that means they'd have to win 2 games on the road to be able to make it into the postseason. And we know how hard road games have been for them this year. But coming up, we've got the Jake Fisher article to tackle the Alperen Sengun Year 3 explosion that might have been a little bit different had they been able to sign Brook Lopez and bring him into the fold as one of the veteran acquisitions this offseason. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire, which is why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, this Jake Fisher article, Alykhan, it's no secret. The Rockets were, pursuing a trio of names this offseason.
They were
a trio of veterans. They were. Oh my God, it's big news for Bijani. Look, they wanted Fred VanVleet, they wanted Dillon Brooks, and they really wanted Brook Lopez. They were unable to get Brook Lopez. We know how that played out. The Rockets had made the series of moves, and then the Rockets opted to not back out of those series of moves in order to clear cap space, in order to be able to sign Brook Lopez. It looks like he basically leveraged the Rockets into a bigger payday with the Milwaukee Bucks, and he ultimately elected to stay in Milwaukee. This team would look very, very different, Alykhan, had the Rockets been able to sign Brook Lopez, and we would not have gotten... Well, I'll back that up a little bit. I won't say we wouldn't have gotten this year 3 leap from Alperen Sengun, but it wouldn't have looked the same, because even though
playing time would be different, 100%.
Playing time would be different. Starting lineup would probably be different, because again, Ime knew that he needed vets to provide stability and structure to this lineup. Now, even though, and I maintain this, and I talked about this originally when the rumors were out there and what the Rockets would look like if they had signed Brook Lopez, there was definitely a world where Ime has used dual bigs in the past, and I definitely think there was a world where Brook Lopez and Alperen Sengun would have had time sharing the court with one another, but there's no way that the starting lineup would have been Brook Lopez and Alperen Sengun like at the 4 or 5, and there's no way that you're signing Brook Lopez to that payday and bringing him in to not start. Now, maybe he would have come in as the starter originally, and Alp, through hard work, through his determination, through his play, would have earned that starting spot back, especially because we've seen the year 3 explosion that he's taken, and we've also seen a little bit of, honestly, regression from Brook Lopez this year in Milwaukee. So if all those stay the same, then yeah, I think there's probably an argument to be made that, a transition would have taken place. But it's honestly one of those things where the Rockets are kind of lucky that the Brook Lopez thing didn't happen, because now we're seeing Alperen Sengun play like a star, right? He's having an all-star caliber season, didn't get the nod this year, unfortunately. But the numbers are there, and this is the one player so far for the Rockets of the core 6 that has been able to solidify himself as an all-star caliber player, the piece that you can clearly most build around right now. Now, what is the upward bound ceiling of an Alperen Sengun-led team? We don't know yet, but we also don't know what Sengun's ceiling actually is yet. We just know that he's the best player on the team, and the sooner you can start putting the right pieces around him, then the better.
I do think it's also fascinating, Jackson, that if you look at kind of his growth and development, and kind of Jake Fisher talks about it too defensively, how things would be different, right? So Brook Lopez was going to be brought in to be a shot blocker, right? And I want to read you this quote. It's a long quote, but it really shows how reflective Alperen Sengun was when all this news was coming out about Brook Lopez. He says, quote, "I didn't understand that as Brook was going to come, and I need to, I just know I have to do a better job on defense. If you want to win, you have to be a winner player. You have to do everything on the court." I mean, Brook Lopez is a really good player, a really good defensive player, but I mean, he's a good shot blocker. I don't think he's as good one-on-one player as me. We have different physical body. Like, he's so tall. He's big. He can block all the shots. I know I can't block all the shots. I know that. I don't have long arms. I'm not that tall. I just need to be where I have to be and just stay vertical, to jump straight up and just make their job harder. I want to. That's the end of the quote, but I want to say something on that growth and development from Sengun as a defensive player. Last year, in about 24 minutes of playing time, okay, he averaged around, I think, three and a half fouls per game. Okay, his first 2 seasons combined, he averaged around 3.5 fouls a game per like 24 minutes played. This year, in about 33 minutes per game played, he's averaging around 3.5 fouls. So last year, he was averaging on pace about 5 fouls a game if you play more than 30 minutes. Now it's around 3. That is so much more for you because you can still rely on LP to be there in the closing moments. With 3 fouls, you can also rely on LP to be aggressive defensively if he needs to, because like he talked about here, his strength is staying vertical, saying all these things. I'd argue one of his strengths is his hands and be able to create deflections and steals and being able to, in pick and roll, whenever he is in drop or high drop, getting into the passing lanes and creating deflections. Him and Fred together, I don't have a stat on this, I'm just doing eye test, but when him and Fred VanVleet are both involved in pick and roll, and then the back line is in good position, right? All depends on the back line. And Fred and Alpi can afford to be aggressive. Almost always you see them, obstruct a passing lane or almost get a hand on it. And I do think that's by design, but Ime's putting those players in positions to be successful. He's learning where they are now. And I think now with Sengun, you can play more of a perimeter-oriented defense because you know that he can hold his own in terms of using his arms and being smart with his arms in his hands to be able to get things for you. So I think it's a big credit to LP, but also a big credit to the Rockets coaching staff of making this young Rockets team the 7th best defense in the NBA.
And Alperen Sengun was incredibly complimentary of the Rockets coaching staff, basically saying Ime is a perfect coach. He's the best coach I've ever had, probably. But not just Ime, Our whole coaching staff is amazing. Everybody's doing a great job. Everybody wants to win. I've never seen a coaching staff like this in my life. And when you see, you understand. They're tough. They're talking to us. They're not scared of anything. And I really feel like, right, an NBA team is ultimately usually a reflection of the coaching staff, right? They embody a lot of the traits that the coaching staff kind of passes along to them, taking on the identity of their head coach. And the Rockets have absolutely this season taken on the identity of Ime Udoka. They're hard-nosed, they're gritty, they don't back down from anybody, they're not afraid of any team. They go in every single night with the belief and genuinely the capability to win any game they step foot into. Now, there are certain pitfalls they have from a talent perspective, from a shooting perspective some nights, but they don't hang their head. We've seen this team get down by as many as 15, 20, 25, whatever, and they fight and claw their way back into games. And we've talked about this with our other weekly co-host, Ben Dubose, but this team is so close. They're right there on the precipice of being so good. They've dropped a lot of games in crunch time this season, and that's not an uncommon thing for young teams to do, right? They're still figuring themselves out. They're still understanding where and how to be effective, how to close games out. We saw it just the other night against the Clippers, right? A few different things could have gone a few different ways in the closing moments of that game, and we're talking about a Rockets win versus the Clippers instead of an unfortunate loss. I will say, to your point about Alp's quick hands and Fred VanVleet, right? I think you can look back no longer than just a few days ago against the San Antonio Spurs. That game was almost a perfect example of how when Alp and Fred are both incredibly active defensively with their hands, they're great at generating turnovers, right? Playing passing lanes. I don't know how many different times we saw Alp in that game either kind of poke the ball away from Victor on a post up or, tip away an entry pass, that kind of thing. And I think when Sengun is given more freedom defensively, he has risen to the challenge and really excelled at being a good defender when given that trust to perform defensively. In previous years, he was stuck in a drop coverage. And, I think Jake Fisher refers to it as like trial by hellfire, right? Just, getting scorched every single night. And it sucks because it was just, it wasn't very creative. It was unfortunate. And, Sengun was oftentimes made to be the scapegoat of the Rockets' defensive woes when realistically the whole team was Swiss cheese, and putting Sengun into drop coverage does no favors to him.
I hope people are realizing now, and we've talked about this, Sengun, like the foul issue was there. Like, I'm not going to say like he did not have a play or a fault in it. And we've talked about this extensively last year, but it's also about your point of attack, right? Like if your point of attack defense is not good, does not matter how good of a shot blocker or shot deterrer or kind of paint defender your big is, right? I'm using different terminologies because they're all different players. But, Alp can do what Alp does without fouling and stay consistent, but he still needs on-ball defenders to be able to limit the amount of penetration that occurs, or to be able to funnel them towards where they want that where the defense wants to on the floor. And that just wasn't happening the last 2 years. You're seeing Jalen be better at point of attack. You're seeing Jabari actually, and something that I did not see happening this early, or see maybe potentially him falling into this role now, becoming more of a weak side shot blocker or a better weak side help defender. Jackson, I was very vocal about Jabari not knowing when to help and when to stay in the corner. He's done a much better job of reading offensive sets this season and making decisive moves on when to be able to help and deter at the rim versus when to stay back and help on rotation. So Jabari has been great as well. So you're starting to see these principles, all these different things come into place. And Ime had this quote for LP, but I really think this quote can apply for a lot of the players. His IQ and his skill set is all there. It's just a matter of maturing and kind of taking that step. And he's done that. LP's taken that step. Hopefully Jabari and Jalen continue to do so. Amen and Cam Cannon, when Tari comes back, he continues to take those steps. Because if they can all take those steps and hone in on these principles and make it a good habit for them, a consistent good habit, this team's, ceiling is something that we probably can't even imagine right now.
I want to highlight one more thing here before we wrap things up. And this was actually closer to the beginning of the Fisher article, but just to illustrate Alpy's mindset, right? This is a guy that was drafted by the Rockets. And yes, the Rockets should get credit for swinging the trade and picking up Alpy just outside of the lottery when so many other teams overlooked him. When you can revisit interviews that Alpy has done where he thought he was going to go, inside the lottery, where he thought he was going to go top 10, where he thought he was going to maybe go to the Spurs or the Sacramento Kings, and all those teams wound up passing on him, and the Rockets were the team that ultimately walked away with the prize. One of the what looks like one of the best players from that draft class now. But the Rockets did they marginalized him, right? The couple of years they didn't really buy into him. They started Christian Wood and Daniel Tice ahead of him, and then credit to the coaching, credit to the front office. Once they realized how good Alpy was, they swung a Daniel Tice trade. They opened up some minutes for him. But even then, the following year, right, we saw the team opt for Bruno Fernando to start over Alperen Sengun because he was going to be a better complementary piece for the pieces that they really did believe in, which was Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. at the time. And even this most recent offseason, right? They were ready to and willing to bring in Brook Lopez because they thought that was going to be the answer at the 5. So Alpy has had, obstacle after obstacle after obstacle in front of him. And his quote to Jake Fisher talking about, the potential of Brook Lopez coming into Houston, he said, "You don't want to lose your spot, but if Lopez was coming, I was ready for a fight." That's the mentality that Alperen Sengun has. That is a dog mentality. That is a star mentality. That is, I'm going to earn whatever I can get, and I'm going to fight and claw. And this is exactly what he's had to do in Houston. And the sooner that the Rockets organizationally all come to terms with the fact that this guy is their best shot at playing competitive basketball, and the sooner that they recognize that this is their franchise guy moving forward, at least for the time being, until if somebody else emerges, right? If Amin or Cam or if Jalen figures out his consistency problems and is able to get to a place where he can play consistent star level ball, awesome. Then maybe you can have multiple pieces that are on the same level. But right now, Alperen Sengun is a clear cut above everybody else. And the sooner the organization realizes that, the better off they'll be for it. So I wanted to highlight that before we wrap things up, because I do think that Alpy has all the makings. He's got the talent, the drive, the mental to be a star in today's NBA. We already know. In fact, no, he's already a star in today's NBA. How much of a star can he be, right? Can he become a top 25, top 20, top 15 type guy? He's putting up numbers that say he can be that one day. He's not there yet, but I have high hopes for him. Yeah, absolutely. High hopes for him.
He's been just so impressive, and I think now these last handful of games you're starting to see this kind of that vision or his vision improve, his dissection of defensive coverages improve, the ability to now consistently score one-on-one, but when the secondary defense comes, knows, hey, I have to do this to also find my own shot. It's not just about finding shots for others. How do I effectively find my own shot within the flow of the offense? And you're starting to see those things happen. So I'm excited to kind of see what happens over the course of the season. For me, man, and these kind of final handful of weeks that we have watching Rockets basketball, it's about staying competitive, being there towards the last few weeks of the season, and having this team play meaningful basketball so we can get defenses honing in on the Rockets so we can have a better understanding of what are their weaknesses going into next year.
We want your thoughts on everything that we discussed in today's show. Let us know in the YouTube comments. We read those every single day. But Alykhan, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at.
Well, shout out to Jake Fisher and Kelly Eco for incredible work with their articles. Honestly, it's been refreshing to be able to hear and understand from the player's perspective and the coach's perspective. And also quick, Ramadan Mubarak and wishing a successful and prosperous Ramadan to all of our Muslim Locked On Rockets listeners as they embark on that coming up here in the next few days. But you can follow me on Twitter at Rockets_insider, and looking forward to talking to you next week, Jackson.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.